everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Talking Acquisition. This is the weekly, high energy, informative, and slightly opinionated view on all things acquisition, procurement, and government contracting related. This is the place where the contracting and acquisition communities and our industry partners connect, talk, listen, and learn from each other. My name is William Randolph. I am your host, and I'd like to introduce my co-host, my colleague, my partner, and dear friend, Soraya Carrera. Hello, Soraya. How you doing?
Hey, Will, doing great, doing great.
Excellent.
How are
Excellent.
you?
I'm good. I'm good. We're back at it. Another
Back
episode.
at it. All right, we're on a roll. All right, well, let's go with this disclaimer. So, our podcast shares information and views on a variety of topics that impact the federal acquisition community. Our goal is to provide thought leadership and perspective, not to criticize, judge, or render political opinions, although we do have some. We provide this free service because we are former federal acquisition professionals and leaders. We believe that the creativity, innovation, and effectiveness of our community is unleashed when we share knowledge, information, and learning. We hope you enjoy our podcast, and we welcome the views and comments of our colleagues across the private and public sectors. So, Will, today's topic actually comes from one of our fans. I'm not going to say viewers, okay, because viewers just sound so boring.
Gotcha,
From one of
gotcha.
our fans who actually sent me an inbox and said, hey, one of the topics that I'd like to hear you guys cover is about commercial contracting and whether people really understand all the flexibilities that are actually out there available when you use FAR Part 12 for the contracting of commercial items and services. So I thought that was a great topic.
I love it.
You're right. And in fact, I found some flexibilities that I didn't even know about. Right? Because if I'd have known, I would have really blown them up. So anyway, so let's start off. Let's talk about commercial practices and let's talk about what we know about commercial contracting.
Sounds good. Sounds good. So I just like to just set the stage a little bit when we're talking about commercial products, commercial services, otherwise known as non-developmental items from a government perspective. And the value, why the government wants to do that. I always say let's start foundationally. And I believe why commercial items are preferred is primarily two reasons. One, the development and bringing the thing to the marketplace, the cost of that, the blood, sweat, tears, and all the energy used to bring an item to the marketplace has been shared.
Right.
Literally by the marketplace. Everybody that uses the service has some, in some level, or product or service, has had some part in paying for leveraging that the goods and services coming to the marketplace. So it's shared. One, that's number one, that the government isn't just paying all of it themselves and then there's the utility of it is then shared by others. Everybody is shares. And I think the second is, along with that, the product and service has been proven out over time.
Right.
From a commercial perspective, is that it's not the risk associated with adopting a new service or bringing a new product to the marketplace. All of the risk hasn't been adopted, taken on by the government. When it's a commercial item, all of the parties that have a vested interest in its delivery, in its utilization, and even in its disposal, when you think about the entire life cycle of any product or service, that risk has been shared. So that's why I think there's a value proposition for government, is that it's a better value construct that the government isn't investing all of the inputs in order to get shared outputs. It's all shared inputs for shared outputs from a commercial perspective.
No, I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying. In fact, that's the reason why it simplifies the buy, right? Because it is out there in the commercial market. So there will be common pricing. You'll have low to high range pricing, but you can actually see what prices look like for this commercial item or service. Also, you learn a lot about the product or service and its maintenance, taking care of that product later on, whether you're talking about software license, hardware, or you're talking about even people. You kind of understand what that market looks like, what prices people are willing to pay, or what prices people are willing to accept for it. So it really simplifies the buy. The other thing it does when you have a commercial item, you start to standardize, right? You start to get some standardization in the product. There might be variations in the quality of the product, but you'll know what a low end product looks like versus a medium versus a high end. I always like to make it real simple. Cars. Think of a car, right? You know what a low end car looks like. You know what a kind of medium level or medium grade car looks like, and you know
Right.
what the
What those
luxury,
characteristics
the
are.
whole, and the rest,
Yeah.
right? And they're in categories, right? So it makes it easier for you to assess the product, for you to determine what kind of product you want, and then evaluating the product becomes a lot easier. But what a lot of people don't seem to understand is that in the federal acquisition regulations, you get a lot of flexibilities when you talk about commercial item buys. So I'm going to open with FAR 12.213. I can't even quote a FAR. Did you notice that?
Doesn't it feel odd?
It does. I mean, I actually did a little bit of homework. I said, let me go pull out some quotes. But FAR 12.213, other commercial practices, it opens with, it is a common practice in the commercial marketplace for both the buyer and seller to propose terms and conditions written from their particular perspectives. Terms and conditions prescribed in this part, 12.213, seek to balance the interests of both the buyer and seller. So what that really is saying is that it is permissible for the seller to introduce terms and conditions, that it's not all one side, it's not just what the government says. This is negotiable.
It's negotiation.
Now, right. It's negotiable like it is in the commercial side of the business. Now, it does say that there are certain things that are not negotiable, right? Because they have to do with the sovereign rights of the government. So things like disputes clauses and things like that. But generally speaking, you can negotiate the terms and conditions between the buyer and seller. And what our fan said was, I don't think people really understand that, especially on the industry side. I'm not sure that they always understand that they have the ability to introduce terms and conditions or to ask for tailoring of certain terms and conditions in the contract. And in fact, I pulled up, as we were talking, the part that talks about those terms and conditions that shall not be tailored. That's assignments, disputes, payment, unless there's some special provision in FAR Part 32, invoices, compliance with laws unique to government contracts, unauthorized obligations, those kinds of things, right? Those are those things that are very unique to the federal government of the United States. They're terms and conditions that are typically found and by law have been incorporated. But you can negotiate. And by the way, even the things that it says is not tailorable, oh, sneaky secret. Write a waiver, you get that waiver approved, you might be able to tailor it, right? So these flexibilities that sit there are there for us to use because we are buying more and more commercial. In fact, I would argue that with very few exceptions, there's a few agencies out there that still have a lot of unique needs and capabilities that are very unique to the
government-centric, truly government-centric, mission-centric.
Exactly. But generally speaking, we're buying more and more commercial products, and we're putting together more and more commercial products to meet some of that government-centric need. So the more that we can take advantage of a FAR Part 12, the more that we can simplify the buy, make it easier for industry, especially smaller companies and mid-tier companies to participate in the competitions, because it does make it a lot easier when you simplify the buy. It makes it easier for the government to justify the buy, right? Because you can do market research becomes easier when you're dealing with commercial products and services, because we all have Google and Bing and whatever the heck else is out there. DuckDuckGo is the latest, right? Anyway, but there's a whole, there's an opportunity to do good market research and get good information about products and services and be able to influence that. And then the other thing that I saw, if I may, is the evaluation. We don't have to go crazy with evaluation criteria. In fact, what I think it's FAR Part 12.4. Let's see, is it 12.4? 12.6. Streamline procedures for evaluation and solicitation for commercial products and commercial services. What it talks about is you can streamline the acquisition to do just technical, past performance, and price. And technical is about looking at the product. You could either ask product samples, review the literature, test the product, but you don't have to go to these crazy extremes where you ask for a lot of paperwork and a lot of written materials about the product,
Absolutely.
right? And
Absolutely.
past performance is about the capability of the company to deliver the product and to maintain it if there's maintenance provisions required. And then, of course, pricing, which again becomes simplified because you don't have to overanalyze the price because you're probably going to have good commercial information on that. So I invite people to take a really close look at FAR Part 12. I know it's not the most exciting reading material in the world.
Yeah, it's not sexy.
It ain't sexy. No, you got to get a pot of coffee, be patient with yourself, take a nap before and after. But read FAR Part 12 carefully.
Yeah.
There's a lot of built-in flexibility. And I agree with our fan that hey, a lot of people aren't taking advantage of this. I see us doing this a lot, especially with IT buys.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. So I want to go to, you talked about tailoring and negotiation of terms and conditions. I'm going to take that. You touched on a little bit on it, but you know where my go-to is: effective market research and understanding.
I set you up for it.
Yes, and understanding agency needs. Okay, that's the two-parter, in my opinion. The essence of effective commercial buying is knowing those two things. One, going to the marketplace and seeing exactly what's out there. Okay, so he's got to do an exhaustive. Now that's a relative term, but it's like don't leave an opportunity. Check all the rocks about what's out there in the commercial marketplace, and then using that information to carefully and coherently describe what the agency needs are. I think some of the times when the cart falls off the rails is that it's like, well, we kind of know what we want, or we'll know it when we see it, but it's too late. Then, when we're building requirements, the system isn't designed to know it when you see it. It's designed to know it up front and then compare against what you say your requirements are.
Yeah, and if I can jump in there, all too often we try to describe, like you said, what we want, not the problem we're trying to solve or what the need is, right? And it's important, I think it's important to always start with that problem statement. What's the challenge? What's the problem that you're trying to solve? What are you going to use this for, right? How is the service going to be used? How does it enable you to accomplish your mission? I think you always got to start with that statement of the challenge or the problem or the situation that you are attempting to address before you get into, and now this is what I'm looking for. And I also think that in defining what you're looking for, one of the things that I see people get tripped up on with commercial buys is they try to describe the product and they get themselves wrapped up in the word. My favorite example, Kleenex. No, they're tissues, not Kleenex, right? But that's like a classic example.
Yeah, classic example.
Right? Yeah. It's a classic example that we all say in common vernacular, Kleenex. In government ease, we can't say Kleenex, we have to say tissues. Or we have to write a brand name or equal justification to say Kleenex, right? So if Kleenex really has the salient characteristics, and by the way, I always thought it was crazy that you had to do a brand name or equal, then you got to list all the salient characteristics. Move on. Don't
so
say
we just use that.
Damn it. Save yourself a justification, right? But we do have to be very careful with that. But that's like the classic example of what happens to us. We start to try to describe the product, and sometimes we get wrapped up in describing a particular product, right? And so we have to be cautious about that. We have to be conscious that we're doing that, understand what we're doing, and help industry offer alternatives. And speaking of alternatives, I know that you have a little point you want to make about that.
Yeah, I do. And it's really about, I went reading, just to do my homework a little bit. And I've got a FAR reference that I want to just call out. 12205 talks about that in a commercial environment, contractors have the opportunity to submit multiple commercial offers for the same requirement. Okay. And that the government must evaluate them separately. Okay. So from a standpoint of understanding, one, what the commercial item is, but two, if there are multiple ways that it can be offered, the value proposition to the government can be offered, that the contractor has the opportunity to do that. And I was like, oh, wow, it's like I had never, I think I knew it, but never, it didn't land well. It's like, wow, as soon as you open FAR Part 12 and say, this is the space, then this is one of the characteristics of that contracting strategy that allows you to submit multiple offers for the same thing if there are different value propositions that may present themselves to the government. I think the second piece to that is price reasonableness.
Right.
When we have to, when our colleagues now, my we comes back really quick.
We always
when our colleagues have to think about price reasonableness, I think there's no greater area in the FAR that allows for the invisible hand of the marketplace to help with price reasonableness and fair and reasonableness determinations than Part 12. You actually can use the prices that are commonly provided in a normal business, in a competitive environment pricing. You can actually use that language. You can use that capability to determine fair and reasonable pricing. So you actually can go to the marketplace, find the thing you need to satisfy the you need to satisfy the government need, and use the marketplace to determine the fair and reasonable pricing. It doesn't get much better than that.
It doesn't get much easier than that, right?
Yeah, from a standpoint of checking the fair and reasonableness block.
Now let's talk about why people probably don't use FAR Part 12, because we know what the problem is. They get wrapped up in 15. They start pulling in 15, right? They start all of a sudden, well, I don't have to look at multiple offers. So in accordance with FAR Part 15, you only submit one offer. This is what happens. We start to try to come, because I can't tell you how many times I saw this when we were doing some of our acquisition planning and strategy sessions. We would sit down and talk, and all of a sudden, you're looking at the solicitation, and we're going to do FAR Part 12 and blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, they're throwing these things in that are Part 15
centric
terminology.
Yeah.
Even if they're not really doing Part 15, they're using that terminology, like discussions, right?
Yeah.
And now you start to get into that whole, well, you just brought in 15.
As soon as you open it up.
Not really in 12, right? And I think what happens is, I don't know that we train it well enough, is what I would say. I'm not sure that we train 12 well enough. We teach a lot of 15. Well,
right, we teach 15. We teach 15.
Well, it's complex. 15 is much more, it has more complexity. I don't think it's more complex. It just has more complexity. There's more to understand in FAR Part 15. So I think we spend a lot of time educating folks on 15 and not enough time on 12. I also think that we teach them separately, which I think is a mistake.
That's fair.
I would teach both, right? I would teach 12 and 15, well, 12, 13, 14, and 15, right? Those FAR and 8. I would teach those all together. I know it makes for a long class. It'll be a little boring. Bring a pot of coffee. But I think teaching it together, or at least making sure that you cover each one sufficiently with the other so that people understand the differences and why you got to stay in a particular swim lane. Because what I've seen, if you go back and look at like case law, especially, and I didn't think about it, but maybe we should have invited a good lawyer to join us. But I bet you in case law, that's probably where we get tripped up the most. Where
I'm sure.
Protests get you tripped up the most when people start mixing the parts, trying to do 15 under 8 and 8 under 12, right? And you do see that. You do see that.
Absolutely. And you're speaking my training language. Here's what I think. You should start with the most simplistic and work your way to the complex, so that the complex is there when you need it. But most of the stuff we do, when you think about the average, at least civilian organization, DHS is a little bit different because it's got some pieces in there that have some. It's DoD like, in some aspects. But the average civilian agency, on some level, almost would never get to 15 type stuff. You could do most of your things in 8, 12, and 13, and you probably could do the lion's share, maybe 75%.
And I think that may even be true for DHS, and even to a certain extent DoD these days, and energy and organizations. Because I think of like energy, they tend to
unique mission, right? Unique mission sets.
But I think more and more it's being commercialized, right? Or the components are commercial. Right? So you're bringing a bunch of commercial components and pulling them together. So again, I just think that wherever we can bring in these flexibilities, and when I talk about training it together, what I mean is if you're teaching a FAR Part 8 class, you got to stop and talk about what's in 12, what's in 13, 14, and 15, right? When you're teaching part 12, you got to talk about
We
what's
talk
in
about
8,
the others.
right?
Yeah.
And so on.
Yeah.
So that you put it together in the CO's mind, in that contract specialist's mind. Because I do think that some people don't bring it together. They don't think about all the parts together.
Yeah.
That's what I do. I think about, like, when we were strategizing for it, I was always thinking, is it an 8? Is it a 12?
Right.
Is it a 15? We rarely use 14, and most of the stuff that came to my level was not 13. But I always 8, 12, we're gonna go 15. And I watched people get themselves caught up in bringing in a lot of the negotiation provisions and the requirements of negotiated procurements into the for parts 8 and 12, and then overcomplicating the eval criteria, because that's the other thing. The evaluation criteria, we can make it as simple or as hard as we choose to be.
Yes.
I never understand, and I know that we got to go, like, people are putting hundreds of contractors in these best in class and these big contracts, right? But I'm of the opinion, why are you looking at corporate capability again?
Yeah.
I know what you're going to tell me. Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate on myself. Well, they don't really evaluate that closely, and you can do teaming on the fly, and yada, 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 yada. I got that. Yeah. But what does corporate capability really tell you? I mean, I do know there's value there. I'm not challenging that. But when you get to these schedule-like, because that's what these BICs are turning into. They're like mini GSA schedules.
Yeah.
And I'm not knocking. I love the GSA schedules, and they were extremely helpful and useful, but that's what they're really turning into. They're putting so many contractors on those contracts that I'm not sure why it's even lucrative to bid on it, other than to say I got one.
Yeah. I think it's fair. When you talk about corporate experience, I'm a big believer in, don't try to police something that you don't have the wherewithal to govern.
Right.
From a standpoint of looking at it, I'm not sure the average person can look at that and then gauge it. It's like, well, you don't know.
It just tells you probabilities. Really, when you think about, like, corporate, it's like past performance.
Yes.
Right? Past performance is a little bit more important, I think.
Right. Rigor. There's some rigor and structure there.
Right, yeah. because that talks about risk reduction, and it gives you the higher probability of success and that kind of stuff. But corporate experience is all about probabilities, because here's the deal. You don't even know that it was under the same leadership, that they're following the same processes that they had when they gave you that corporate experience. I mean, they're just being honest.
Absolutely.
Right? So when people throw, like, a lot of weight on that, I go, you got to be careful with that, because
you got to be careful.
Circumstances aren't going to be equal. Oh, and by the way, when they were working that project, they were working with another agency, not yours. So you're going to be possibly the difference, between them being successful or not. So I always kind of tell people, watch this eval criteria that you throw out there, and make sure that it's truly meaningful and you're going to get something out of it. The why. Answer the why. I'm like a little kid when people show me eval criteria. I'm like, why? Why? I used to do that a lot. I used to go, why is that important? Tell me why this matters, right? Because I do think that sometimes we just get so wrapped up in trying to get the perfect buy that we forget that there is no such thing as a perfect buy.
Agreed.
There's no such thing, right? And it's only as good as the time and energy you put into it. And let's use criteria that makes a little bit more sense. Big fan of oral proposals, because I get to meet the team. I get to see the team in action, and it can truly make a difference. And I like the show me, don't tell me, right? If you could demonstrate the process to me, or if you can give me the product and I can
see it,
test it. Yeah, let me touch it, feel it. I'm a kick the tires kind of girl. I'm gonna tell you that right now.
Agreed. And the thing about it is, in this space, when we're talking about in the commercial space, why not use the commerciality of the environment to help you? It's like we have to tease stuff out like we don't know what's in the commercial marketplace.
Exactly. And then the other thing that I would say is I think I'm seeing more and more companies, or at least it feels this way from my conversations with some of the industry out there, and I think it started over the last couple of years, that a lot of companies are setting up like innovation centers so that they can bring in the government and show them capability, right? Show them what they're working on and show them what they're developing or what they're thinking about. I'm seeing that more and more.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think a lot well, they probably figured I got this office space that I don't have any employees coming, so let
Right,
me
right,
turn it
right,
into
right.
an innovation. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. That was a joke. But anyway, but I am hearing more and more companies talk about doing these like innovation centers, demonstration centers. And I think that's a good idea.
I love it.
By the way, I think we should be out there looking at stuff even before we're thinking about buying it,
Of
right?
course.
I think we should be out there constantly trying to learn from industry. What are you doing? What are you
Yeah,
working on?
yeah,
How are you advancing technologies? What is the next big thing that you're working on and that you're
yeah.
thinking about? So that we can be thinking about it. Because I think that a lot of times we're behind the power curve by the
Yeah,
time.
I'm,
Yeah.
I love that idea. I don't know if I'm sure you recall, probably 15, maybe 20 years. 20 years ago, there was a thing called IRAD. It
Yes.
was like internal research and development
Development.
dollars that the
Mhm.
companies would use. Now, IRAD went the way of the dodo bird, but maybe this is the reconstitution of that concept. It's like we're going to put some time and effort, maybe not necessarily a lot of dollars, but we're going to put some time and effort into having like you said, the back office. Just like, hey, let's go build some stuff in there and let's
Yeah.
just tinker and invite people in to look at it. I love that idea. I
Yeah.
was always, again, where I grew up and cut my teeth in a systems acquisition organization. IRAD was a thing. It was like, oh no, we put some money in the pot and created this thing. So if you like it, come on and let's, we can talk. But that in the tight budgets of the early 2000s, that
Yeah,
kind
it
of
started getting cut out.
went
Well,
away.
but interestingly enough, companies still do research and development. They do.
Yeah,
It's just you don't always hear about it as much unless you're really engaging with companies,
yeah,
right? If government is really truly talking to industry and inviting them in to learn about their challenges stuff, then you start to hear about these things because companies aren't going to stand up in the middle of the room and go, oh yeah, I'm developing
yeah.
a
Look at my
robot.
secret sauce.
But yeah, let me tell you my secret sauce in front of everybody else, right?
Right,
That's not
exactly.
going to happen.
Yeah,
But if the government is truly engaging them and sharing with them, like, here strategically is where I'm trying to take the agency, these are the problems that I'm trying to solve or the challenges that I have, or here's the latest legislation that's impacting me that I got to comport with. I think that they find that industry is responsive to that. It's just that industry's, like you said, it's not going to spill the secret sauce, but they're happy to show the government. So I think that's where some of these demonstration centers are coming from. But I'm hearing a little bit more about that from certain companies, that shall remain nameless. And I've actually been invited to a few to come take a look at them. And I know that they're trying to invite government officials. And I think the government has to get out there a little bit more.
yeah,
And it's
great.
hard. Look, I got it. You got 15,000 companies out there. I'm
Yeah, and you
exaggerating.
got a day job, so
Right, you got a day job, right? But we got to find a way
got to
to
figure it out.
continually get industry and government engaged. I know I sound like a dead horse because I'm always beating this horse because it's something that I firmly believe. We cannot be effective. Like, there goes the we cannot be effective in our government in accomplishing all the acquisitions that we have to do and solve the problems that we need to solve if we don't know what's going on in the commercial market.
Yeah,
Just can't do it. You can't do it in the span of a procurement life cycle. And everybody really believes, I don't know where the hell we get this belief, that procurements truly take 12 months. The procurement doesn't take 12 months. The procurement probably, I haven't looked at the latest stats. I'm telling you, the procurement probably is taking you about 4 to 5 months. You're spending an additional 6 months in the protest, usually, because
right.
you got to go through at least 2 or 3
Yeah.
cycles of that stuff. That's not GAO's fault. That's the protest, right? They're taking,
Here we
taking
go.
their 100 days.
Here we go.
In fairness to the GAO, they do get it done in 90 to 100 days. I've always been very impressed with that. But then we got to go through the cycle again, where the government decides to take corrective action, and then sometimes on the front end. But the reality is the procurement itself, from when you get the solicitation out to when you make the award, I don't believe it takes 12 months. It's very unusual. If you see that in a procurement, it's either a very complex procurement and you're putting a lot of phases and steps into it. So you
gates and down selects and
down selects and that kind of stuff. Or you just don't have a good procurement and you're modifying the crap out of it, right? To amend your way out of a bad
out of a bad plan. Yeah.
I remember just a little war story. very early on, when I took over the Office of Procurement Operations as HCA, I had one of those. And I always remember that I was hailed as a hero because I canceled it. Everybody
Mm.
else was afraid to cancel the procurement. They were upwards of, I think, 14 amendments
Whew. Yeah,
on a
that's a sign.
solicitation that
That's a
I don't
sign.
remember how many pages it was, but they were upwards of 14 amendments. They'd already had 2 pre-solicitation protests, and they were coming to me to ask for permission to do the 15th amendment and extend the thing, another 30 days or whatever. And I went, why? Little girl, why?
Tell me more.
I said,
Yeah.
why do we have so many amendments? So I sat down and read, and a lot of the amendments were trying to get our, we didn't write a good solicitation to start with. It wasn't a great solicitation. The requirement wasn't very well articulated. And then we were trying to amend our way out of that problem. And I said, no. 15 amendments. You're never going to get out of protest hell. You're not, because as soon as you're done with the pre-award, then you make an award, then you're going to go into the post-award, right? So this is like protest hell, because I was like reading, I was like looking at it from a protest perspective.
Like, yep.
So, but my point is, you can't amend your way out of a bad requirement. You really can't amend your way out of a weak solicitation. Sometimes you got to be smart and say, you know what, game over. Let's start. I take your hit. Start over.
Noted.
The industry may not appreciate the do-over, when you first do it, but they'll appreciate getting a better quality solicitation to respond to, rather than reacting to 15 crazy amendments where they get all confused. And then, we do, how we answer questions. You see, I'm going off the deep end. We went from commercial contracting, right?
Another topic.
The way we answer questions in part is 15, or we say in section H, we address that.
Right.
But that wasn't the question. We know you addressed it. We just didn't get what you said, right? I can't tell how many times I would read the answers to questions like that, and I go, "Really? Is that what we're going to talk about?"
That's what we're doing.
Anyway, so back to commercial items. Because I distracted. My point is that commercial item buying is a simpler way to do it, and that should be pretty much the practice these days in most civilian and even in those agencies that do have highly customized, highly specialized requirements and procurements. A lot of the day-to-day stuff that you buy is commercial items, and we should be leaning into Part 12, but we just have to understand that you got to stay in that swim lane. You can't try to combine the parts because it'll get you in trouble. And I think any good lawyer will tell you that in government. I can't tell you how many times when we were sitting down and talking to legal counsel, addressing ourselves to a protest or what have you, that was one of the underlying issues, that we kind of deviated. And, our CO would say, well, but this is a Part 12. We shouldn't have to do that. And the lawyer would go, yeah, you might have thought you started with a Part 12, but here are the 15 things the Part 15 things that you did, which are now causing you to look at it from a Part 15 perspective. So, I can tell you, I can't tell how many times we talked about this in our strategic planning meetings for the acquisitions and our acquisition strategy sessions, to remind people you got to stay in your swim lane. You can't bounce all over the place.
All right, Soraya, we're about that time. Yes, good.
Well, I got the obvious.
Good, lively discussion on this one. I enjoyed it. So let's leave a nugget.
Yeah.
Let's leave a nugget.
I want to leave a nugget for both industry and government.
Okay.
So for industry is you need to understand the FAR as much as government needs to understand the FAR. If you're doing business with the federal government, you need to take time to really understand these provisions, to make sure that you're looking at what the FAR really says and trying to understand it, and don't be afraid to ask questions. I think that's extremely important, because you might be leaving a lot of opportunity on the table. Opportunity not only for you as a business, but opportunity to help the government do a better job. So, because I always look at it from that world where we're all in this country together and we're all working together. So industry, make sure you understand it. And from a government perspective, I do think that every now and then picking up the FAR and dusting it off and taking a look at it doesn't hurt. Even old, decrepit contracting officers, former chief procurement officers, heads of contracting.
Stop talking about me.
Would be program managers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
we pick it up and dust it off, but I
Every
think
now and
it's
then, yeah.
extremely important. When I used to write procurements, when I did the contracting myself, and even when people were coming in to brief me, I very often would go, that's why my FAR was very dog-eared, because I would look
Yeah.
at FAR Part 15 or FAR Part 12 just to see what it would say.
Get your mind right.
Right,
Yeah.
to get my mind like in the right place so that when we sat down and talked, I could ask intelligent questions, or at least what would appear to be intelligent questions.
Good stuff.
Yes.
Good stuff. Well, I'm I'm gonna follow your lead. I'm gonna do a twofer nugget as well for our government colleagues. Trust and leverage the commercial market. Trust it. Okay, it's good. It actually, when you land in 12, there's some things you can use the market to help you get through it. So trust it, trust the process. And then for our industry participants, industry partners, make sure that your solutions are findable, that they're known, that you have done the work to put your ideas, concepts, solutions in front of government in some effective way. I heard the saying that said the best place to hide a dead body is on the second page of a Google search. Okay, because no one goes to the second page. Okay, so in industry, if you want to have your solutions known, find a way to get to page one. I'm not suggesting that all market research, starts and emanates and starts and concludes at Google, but I bet it often starts there. So,
I think so too. Yeah.
So I would encourage you, find your way. If you want a differentiated service or product delivery in the commercial space, make sure you are findable from a standpoint of when government is looking, you can be found.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Findable. You always come up with these great words.
I got you.
Findable. I like that. I'm gonna go look it up. I'm gonna go Google findable.
Right.
It's probably on page 2.
All right. And with that, another one in the books. Thank you so much, Soraya. Had fun.
Yeah, no, this great conversation. Thank you very much. And do want to remind the folks that view our podcast, please send us any suggestions or comments that you have on our topics. We're always willing to listen, positive or negative. If you don't agree with us, please feel free. And if you want to join us on the podcast, just send a note to Will or send a note to me, and we'll get you on here.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
And Will, it's always good to see you.
Good to see you as well. All right. And with that, all the best.
Take care.
Be well. Bye-bye.